People are depressed, poor, and living with their parents. Well, at least that's the title of this video. What's going on, revolutionaries? And if you're new here, welcome to the war. So this content creator is going to get into what's going on in the world, and I've only saw like the first 30 seconds, so you're going to get my commentary in real time. And here I like to talk about getting free, breaking free from the system, and let's see what he has to say.
What I've been thinking about lately is how there's so many people who are adults, age 18 through 29, living with their parents. And when you talk to somebody that's older, they make it seem like it's relatively a new phenomenon. Like that's a new thing. Like why are there so many, grown kids? Like why are there so many grown people living with their parents? It's like, but y'all was doing it too. I looked the numbers up. I said, let's compare today to 1970. And I was able to find 1960 as well. Now the numbers, I wasn't surprised because I had already knew like the numbers of today, like about 50% of people ages 18 through 29 live with their parents, right? But then when I looked at the 70s and the 60s, it said the 70s was 32% or something like that, 31%, and the 60s was 29%.
32% to 50% is a huge jump. I'm good. I have to say that statistically speaking, if you think about the whole, like the population of America, a like 20% jump is major. We're gonna start right there, but I will tell you this: there's nothing wrong with living at home with your parents until you get married. Multi-generational housing is not a bad thing. See, here in America, they like to sell you the dream of go out there, get into the world, be free, don't live at home, you bum, get out here and slave like the rest of us. And that's the thing, they want you to be an obedient worker. You look at a lot of cultures that are not American. You look at Latin cultures, African cultures, hell, even certain European cultures. If you look at like Italians and whatnot, living at home until you're married is perfectly fine. I actually recommend you stay at home, assuming you have a decent relationship with your parents and you stay at home, maybe help them out with the bills around the house, because helping with bills around the house is still significantly cheaper than getting out in this world and struggling through it with everybody else. And while you're there, stack your money. I don't care if you make $100,000 a year. If you're not married, there's really no reason to have your own place. Hell, in certain cultures, living at home while you're still married is still a thing. Grandma and grandpa live in the back house, you live there with your kids and everything, and everybody lives in one house. It's community, and people are doing that everywhere. You don't have to just live alone. Like, you don't have to be out in this world giving your money to a bunch of people. Hell, if you guys have a house, you own a home, you can work with your family to pay off that home and build generational wealth. I know I don't really like to talk about generational wealth too much because this whole thing is about freedom. But one part of breaking free is just breaking free from social norms and this idea that you have to get out in the world is not a real thing. Yes, understand how the world works, understand things like money management, and these are things that you can learn while still living at home. So 20% jump is big, and people have been living at home for since the dawn of time. But please understand that living at home is not a bad thing. It's not a weird thing. Emancipate yourself from this idea. Emancipation. Please subscribe.
That actually is not that much different. Given that back then, you can literally feed a whole family with a factory job. What factory job or warehouse house job do you know today that can feed a family of five, seven, nine? What factory job you know can do that?
I didn't mean to stop it again so soon, but this is true. I look at some of these old videos of these men talking about how they were able to buy a house, white picket fence, have two children, own a car. Their wife was a stay at home. You ask them what they did, and they were a milkman. They were a mail carrier. You cannot buy a house as a mail carrier for the USPS today. If you work for FedEx or UPS, you might could buy a house, but you're gonna earn it in blood. Them guys buy a house just to say they have one because they don't get a chance to stay there because they have to work so much overtime. It's really backbreaking work. Fun fact: I worked at UPS before for a day. Let me not even say a day. I clocked in at 11 p.m. and I quit by like 11:30. Those fools needed slaves, not me. So yeah, I got out of there. And then the next day, I thought about going back. I really did. And I probably shouldn't have thought about going back because I walked off on the job. But I pulled out of my driveway. I was gonna make some kind of excuse, like, hey man, I was sick, family emergency, I didn't get a chance to tell nobody, yada yada yada. So I was gonna bullshit them. So I pulled out the driveway and I was like, man, hell no. And so I just went back home. But you cannot buy a house today on a factory job. You cannot buy a house today with a job like a mail carrier or a milkman. They don't have those anymore. But you get the point I'm trying to make. You just can't do it. And if you can, you have to kill yourself in overtime, which wasn't the thing back then. Yes, overtime has always been the thing, but you didn't have to work 50 hours a week to support your family of four. That is the truth.
Back then you could buy a house with a factory job, bro, a warehouse job, an assembly line job. These are things that like, so when the older generation likes to criticize the younger generation, these are things that don't really make any sense. And I've been thinking about like the amount of people, especially like young adults, I'll say mainly age 18 through 29, who are depressed, they're broke, they ain't got no money like that. And they're living with their parents. But like if you really think about it, like when the pandemic happened, the pandemic was not a good thing at all. But what it did force people to do, it forced families to actually sit at home with each other. Now there was still the interruption of social media, so it wasn't really like, it wasn't like some off grid type stuff where it's like you just sitting there and you ain't got no phones, you ain't got nothing. It's just like y'all just got to entertain each other and make each other laugh and have fun and break bread and get along with each other. It wasn't like that. People still had TV and things like that. But this is like the first time since technology has boomed the way it has that people have actually had to sit down right next to each other.
And people found out they hated each other. That's why I say if you're gonna stay home with your family, it is imperative that you at least get along. You don't necessarily have to like them a whole lot, but you have to at least get along. Could you imagine what COVID would have been like in the 60s or the 70s with no cell phones? But back then you had community, so you could probably still see the people around you. But imagine what that would have been like. Well, it probably wouldn't have been as bad because the only propaganda you would have gotten would have been from the news or a newspaper. You could have just turned that off. Now you were bombarded on social media and everything like that. People were making you feel terrible if you weren't as terrified as they were. But could you imagine what that would have been like? Imagine being like legitimately locked away from society. And the government knows that they can make you do that again. COVID, I feel like, was an experiment. Outside of the fact that, it was an actual like medical experiment gone wrong, it was also a social experiment to where the government was able to find out that, with sheep mentality, with herd mentality, and with a little fear factor, we can kind of make these people do everything, or anything, I should say. And that's why I tell people, if you grew up in Nazi Germany, you probably would have been a Nazi, not a revolutionary. Maybe not a Nazi, but you probably would have been on a neutral standpoint. You wouldn't have been standing up revolting like you do here in America, because here you have freedom of speech, you have all these things. But with herd mentality, I promise you, a lot of you guys would not have been as revolutionary as you are right now.
And with the prices going like increasing and everything, inflation increasing, it's really difficult to even get an apartment because they want you to pay like they want you to make like 3 or 4 times the rent. I mean, there's so many things that like makes it very difficult for people age 18 through 29 to get their own place. You think these people want to live at home? They got some that do want to, live in their mama's basement. Yeah, you got some that want to do that. But for the most part, most adults want to be out on their own. That's why you think in droves these young adults go to college. You think they want an education? No, they're trying to get away from home. They're trying to be with a bunch of young people that's their age, that are also adults and have the freedom to be able to party as much as they want to and stuff like that. Don't nobody want to live at home like that. People be acting like they live at home because they want to live home. No, they live at home because, bro, they working 2 jobs and it still ain't enough money. But when the pandemic happened, I thought it was a terrible thing. But one of the things that came good out of it was that people started spending more time with each other. Because now, in the 70s, by the time people was 18, 19 years old, at 18 and 19 years old, they was getting married, starting a family, and having a whole house. At 18 and 19 years old, having a house with a family. What?
That's not actually true. Not in the 70s, more like the 1800s. But in the 70s, you could at 18, 19 years old, you can get married and get an apartment. And they were still buying houses earlier than we are now. Like, let's say under the age of 30. Right now is the oldest age of home buyers ever, because if you're young right now, it's just too expensive to buy a home. And actually, financially, it doesn't make any sense. There's something here called the 5% rule, which is you take the average cost of a house in your state or city or whatever you want to do. Let's say city, and then you multiply that times 5% and you divide it by 12. If that number is higher than the average cost of rent, then you rent and you invest the difference in the stock market. And that way you can still be building equity, not necessarily equity, but your money will be appreciating over time and you're going to be getting money. And that's one way to do it. So I'm just going to give you guys a real easy example. Here in the state of California, the average cost of a house is $880,000. If you multiply that times the 5%, and that gives you $440,000. And oh, well, that's 50%. I apologize. 880,000, and you multiply that times 5%. That gives you 44,000. You divide that by 12. That's $3,666 and 6666. You know what I mean? It's a continuation. So let's round that up to 3,700. If the average cost of rent is lower than 3,700, then it makes more sense to rent and then invest the difference. So just for the sake of the video, I'm gonna see what the average cost of rent is in the state of California. The average cost of rent is about 2,600, 26,666, so 2,700 a month. So the difference is about $1,000. You could probably get something way cheaper. Let's say you get something for 2,000, because something people don't understand is that in California, we have some really expensive places. You have places like San Francisco, and then within San Francisco, you have even more expensive places. And in Los Angeles, yes, that's expensive, but then you have places like Beverly Hills, Manhattan Beach, things of that nature, which are even more expensive, which skew the number. So let's say you pay $2,000 a month. Then what you would do is you would invest the 1,700 a month difference that you would be paying in mortgage into the stock market or into a high yield savings account. That way, you're still building wealth slowly, just like building wealth through a house is slow, and you just go with the market over time. Now, you're not buying individual stocks, you're buying ETFs, index funds, things of that nature, and your money is still going to increase in value over time and you're going to beat inflation. So you don't actually have to buy a house.
What? So it's like people were so spread out, but now people are like, I guess in a sense, living families are living together like multi-generational families. You got the grandparent, the parent, and then you got the new generation. This is actually becoming more common, which it was, I think, a few hundred years ago, or actually all throughout society. That's the thing. That's what makes it okay. Let me just simplify it. Yes, does it suck that inflation has became what it has become? Yes. Does it suck that people are depressed because they ain't making money and social media and comparison and all these type of things? Yes. Are these things sad or fortunate? Yes. But you know what's forcing people to do? It's forcing people to go back to the basics of how it was the whole time. We started out as humans living in close proximity with one another.
You know what's interesting? He said hundreds of years ago. It's not hundreds of years ago. It still happens right now. It's only here in America where they got you convinced that you have to move out at 18. They sold you guys a dream in the 60s, the 70s, even up into the 80s. Towards the 90s, things start to shift a little bit, and people bought the dream because for a time it was the truth. For a time, you could do that. Like Michael Jackson's dad, Joe Jackson, he worked at a factory in Gary, Indiana. Now, if you don't know about Gary, Indiana, it's everything you think that Chicago is. It's Chirac. It was not a good place, especially back then. He was like just a poor man in Gary, Indiana. He had a house. He was a poor man in Gary, Indiana, worked the assembly line, or he worked at a factory, or like in he worked some kind of blue collar job, basically. Yet he was still able to buy a house and raise all them kids. But he was a poor man from Gary, Indiana. So that's what you could do back then.
We started out in villages and tribes and close communities. This new thing where this parent has three sons or three daughters, and one daughter live over there in another state, and another state, and everybody all over the place. That's a new thing. That's not a common thing. That's a new thing because of the advancement of technology, planes, cars, all these type of things. But guess what? The relationships that people had all throughout society were more rich than it was rich. I'm not saying you don't have rich relationships of today, but whenever you spend less time away from somebody and you have to rely on man-made technological devices to stay connected with people, it's not going to be nearly as rich. So you FaceTiming people, you calling people on the phone, you texting people, you communicate through social media. These are all new things.
Yeah, social media was supposed to bring people together, and for a time it did. For example, let's say you went to college, you're gonna meet a lot of great people. But in the 70s, you meet people in college, and then once you guys graduate, you might never see them again. Phone calls every so often. You might see them a couple times, every few years. But now you can make friendships and relationships that last a lifetime, but they only last digitally. And that's cool with people you meet in college. If the only time you talk to the people in your life is through social media, through the phone, through things of that nature, then we've lost the plot. You got to be out there with your friends, with your family. You have to be out there living, having fun. You have to be enjoying life, because if you do not, then you just have this weird digital lifestyle, and that's not the lifestyle that you want to live. I promise you.
There's nothing like being right there with the person, right there. That's how it has always been since the beginning of time. So with inflation happening, people having to live, families having to live like with one another, not moving out and things like that as much. It's actually, even though all the other negative stuff, like okay, it's harder to pay bills and things like that, but that right there is what humanity is all about. It's all about being with each other, communing a community, like being with each other. Like that's why people are depressed because everybody is so isolated to themselves. I watched this video on YouTube not too long ago, and it was talking about like it was it was talking about a lot of different things, but it was talking about like how did people like back in the day have privacy if everybody were in small groups and villages and things like that, and it was actually dangerous to be solo because it might be an animal like a lion or a tiger or something that might if you by yourself that's when you're more of a target to those ferocious animals. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it was talking about like different things, but I'm not really gonna get into like how people have privacy, but us having all of this personal time and just being by ourselves is essentially a new thing. It's really
The thing back then is you still had your privacy, but you had community too. Also, there wasn't too much to be private about because you weren't as freaked out as you guys are now. You guys are extra freaky. That's why you need privacy. When people talk about privacy, they talking about the fact that they're freaked out and they're talking about how they're overstimulated. Turn the goddamn phone off. You wouldn't be so overstimulated. I'm gonna put the original video down below. I want to get into some of the comments. Let's see what people are saying here. The American dream is over already. Now I gotta work 50 hours more to survive. You don't have to do that. I'm pretty sure you meant 50 hours or more to survive. You don't have to do that. I promise you, you don't. Minimize your life, lower costs, get out of debt, and you can live a whole lot easier. You got to be a CEO of 3 different companies just to be able to cover rent. I know they might make you believe that, but honestly, most people are just bad with money. I'm gonna be real with you. Most people are just terrible with money. And I was one of those people who was terrible with money. And even now, I wouldn't say I'm great with money, but I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm becoming better, I'm evolving as a person. And I want you guys to do the same. That's the purpose of this channel. I want you guys to do this with me. That's awesome living with your parents. Stack up, no shame. No shame in the game as long as you are moving towards something. Yeah, this is exactly the same thing I said. Stay at home, help your family out, pay some bills, and save your money. If you make, let's say, $80,000 a year, and let's say you spend 2,000, let's say you take home 80,000 just to make the numbers easier. Let's say you take home $80,000. That's a lot of money for take home. That's a lot of. Let's say you take home $60,000 a year. Okay, you're taking home $60,000 a year. That's $5,000 a month. If you're spending $2,000 a month on rent and then all the things that come with that, utilities, groceries, this, that, whatever, you're spending a lot of money. But let's say you stayed at home with your parents and instead of paying 2,000 a month in rent and then all these other things, you give your parents $1,000 a month or 500, whatever your relationship with your parents is, because you want to be helpful around the house. You can save a whole lot more and your parents can save a whole lot more. We have to get back to this point of community because when you have a community, it's better for everybody. It's way better. Just read one more. I stayed with my family until I got married, as I mentioned, and started my own family. I don't see the point in leaving until you are ready to start your own family if you and your parents had a healthy relationship, like I mentioned, and you maintain a two while there. Job or two while there, sorry. There were so many benefits to staying home for all parties included. Yes. Now, this is going to assume you have at least a decent. It doesn't have to be the perfect or the greatest relationship. It just has to be decent. You do that and you will live a very very comfortable life, I promise you.